Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and for those who've been following me for the past few weeks at least, you'll appreciate that I have been somewhat confused at the government's continued policy of applying SPS checks on goods coming in from the EU at the end of this month. I've been trying to understand the insanity of it, but now, very late in the day, it appears that the government are very quietly reining it all back. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So at the start of this year, when we left the customs union and single market, in other words, when Brexit started properly, we created a hard customs and standards border between Britain and the EU overnight after decades of increasingly free trade. EU countries had been preparing this for years, and they applied all of the required checks on our goods being exported to the EU. In return, we applied none at all. We hadn't been preparing for years, you see, even though we were the ones who supposedly wanted this. We didn't have the facilities, we didn't have the systems, we didn't have the staff. To have applied checks without even being ready at such a time would have meant food shortages in Britain. Really that simple. Not the auspicious start to Brexit that Boris Johnson would have hoped for. So they delayed it until halfway through this year. Even then, nobody in the know was really confident that we'd be ready by July either. So round about March of this year, I think it was, the government announced that actually we'll be delaying it again. Full checks will not take place until January 2022. But some checks were still scheduled to begin in October of this year. That's now in 3 weeks' time. That includes sanitary and phytosanitary checks, amongst other things. But we don't have the vets. We still don't have enough customs officials. We still don't have the facilities. And unless the government are keeping it under wraps, put it this way, I've seen no evidence that we really have the systems up and running either. Now, when you consider that we've been suffering from increasingly severe shortages of food as the summer has gone on, it seemed a sort of madness to suddenly be applying new checks on EU imports. Because we can't produce as much food as we used to, owing to staff shortages, we are more reliant on EU imports for food. October was all set up to be a massive shit show, pardon my French. The shortages wouldn't have been easy for Brexit enablers to have brushed off then, would they? I was convinced they'd have to delay them again. I'd been talking about this on and off for months. They've got to delay them. They can't go ahead with this. But then they didn't delay them. Not in July. Well, they're leaving it a bit late. Not in August. We're in September and there was still no announcement. But businesses need plenty of notice for a change in import and export arrangements. They can't just announce a delay with a few weeks left to go. So then I started to believe that the government were actually insane enough to go ahead with this. But then some sense of normality was restored. A couple of days ago, some eagle-eyed journalists noted that although the government haven't announced any changes to their plans formally, they were still saying, oh yeah, these checks are going ahead. The legislation didn't seem to back up the full plans. So DEFRA, which is the government department which handles food supplies, were asked a few questions and then they confirmed, yeah, there's going to be another delay on chilled meats. So no reverse sausage wars going on then. But even then, that would still mean checks that were in no position to carry out efficiently, taking place on other products of animal origin at least. But then when pressed, some officials from DEFRA also suggested, according to a report in The Independent this time, that further delays are likely to be announced. Their justification for this? Is it to say, do you know what, we are just hopelessly unprepared for Brexit? No, don't be silly. They blamed the pandemic. Oh, right, yeah, because we didn't know about the pandemic until this month, did we? Absolute monkeys. How thick must people be to fall for this claptrap now? Over a year ago, everyone was saying that the Brexit timetable was already too tight. Last June, everyone was going, look, it was already too tight, this timetable, and now we've got the pandemic in place. This is going to make it impossible to prepare for Brexit. You need to extend the transition period. The EU offered an extension to the transition period. We turned it down flat. During the pre-vaccination period of the pandemic, we turned down an extension. We'll be ready, our government said. Were we bollocks ready? And we're still not ready. And I'll tell you this, and no matter how ill-informed people are, nobody should need telling this. There is no way that any impact of the pandemic that was not known about last year could possibly be affecting us differently now. This year continues to be a nightmare for COVID in this country because our government obviously accepts donations from the Coronavirus Appreciation Society. But we have far more tools to manage than we did last year. That we are still in a position whereby 900 people are dying a week from COVID in this country is because of a complete lack of government intervention. Not because of the pandemic itself. Not because that's got worse. Just our government's got worse. The reason we are delaying yet again, and why we will continue to delay for as long as we can, is that we cannot possibly manage Brexit. It's ridiculous. Even on a hypothetical level, it was never going to work. Guess what? It's not working. It's impossible to get back to the levels of trade that we enjoyed before Brexit. It's just mathematics. We cannot funnel enough lorries through our ports at the same rate because checks mean delays. Even if we had the drivers, we can't do it. We're a pissing island. We can't just create a new route. What needs to happen is for our economy to shrink down to the point where we can get the levels of trade that we can cope with. But that's an adjustment that takes time. We have to get used to not having as much choice of things. And that's years, not months. We also need to reduce our expectations of the range of food we have available. We need to import less, but we can't produce as much. So what we actually need to do is reduce the level of food and drink consumed in this country. Again, in order to manage this without people getting very upset, the adjustment needs to take place over a long time. So are we just going to end up with a farce whereby the government keeps delaying and delaying ad infinitum? Gets to a few months' time, goes, checks coming in January. Yeah, we're going to have to delay those. Sorry, pandemic. It gets to next spring. We're going to have to delay again. We're supposed to have full checks in place next January. That's not happening. When it comes to how long can the government keep delaying, we have to bear three pressures in mind here. The first is that we're breaking World Trade Organization rules. We're giving EU businesses an unfair advantage over ones from, say, China and the United States. US imports, for example, are subject to checks that EU imports are not. Now, this was fine before because we had a formal treaty to cover it. It was all above board. But now we don't. We are allowing the EU to have fairly free trade with us without actually having a treaty to facilitate it. Our trade and cooperation agreement doesn't come close to allowing for this ease of trade for them. So the US or China could start bellyaching at some point because it's hurting their businesses. But I've seen no evidence that this is happening at the moment. It's possible that with global trade still trying to recover, get back to normal, that they've got bigger fish to fry. The second issue is that we are creating a very tempting route for smugglers. Laws mean nothing if they're not enforced, and we are not enforcing them. Although there's paperwork, sure, there's supposed to be paperwork for EU imports. If no one's checking that the paperwork matches the consignment, what good is it? At some point, the media might even start to question why our borders continue to be left wide open. But the third pressure is immense. The government are still battling with the EU over our post-Brexit future arrangements. It's going to go on forever and ever and ever. It's going to go on for years, these negotiations. But the thing is, we have nothing to bargain with now. Because we're not applying checks to EU imports, EU businesses can sell to British customers pretty much as easily as before Brexit. But British businesses are massively hampered from selling in the rest of Europe. Well, this is actually better for EU businesses than before Brexit because it's comparative. It's not just that they're just as competitive as British businesses, they're more competitive. In fact, you could argue for some things they're more competitive in the British market than British produce because they aren't suffering from worker shortages to the point where wages are rocketing up. This failure to apply checks is crushing British businesses and it's preventing the British government from having any leverage whatsoever over the EU. We've got nothing and Brussels know it. They are pissing themselves laughing right now. So it's a bit of a catch-22 really. We can't push for anything more from the EU because we've got no leverage. Like, we've got nothing to offer by way of easing the path for them. It's as easy as you get. You know, that leverage has to come from trade barriers against EU businesses. We have to be able to hurt EU businesses to get any leverage. But we can't do that without starving ourselves because we don't have the capacity to carry out checks and still get enough food into the country. Completely buggered. Just not as buggered as if they tried to implement these checks, which is, until a couple of days ago, I thought they were actually insane enough to do, because then we'd actually be starving. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.